Okay, hello everyone. My name is Deepak. I'm a senior engineering manager in Red Hat. And today I would like to talk about and possibly walk you through some of the authentication handling strategies in E2E testing. So most of you who have been in QE for long know that and have been doing E2E testing, know that Selenium handles end-to-end testing in a different way than the modern JavaScript-based test automation tools like Playwright and Cypress. Uh, so uh, during my career, first as a QE manager and then as a uh, engineering manager, I noticed that most of the test automation teams don't really pay an attention to the how authentication and authorization strategies take place in E2E. They are very oblivious to this fact that there are better ways of doing handling test automation in your E2E suite. So I thought maybe I should probably share this talk with people and see if uh, if it can be helpful to you all. All right. Okay. So we'll start with the problems of traditional E2E authentication approach. So first of all, let me also give you a brief introduction to what the uh, what the difference is between authentication and authorization. So authorization is in a very simple example. Let's say there are buildings where you can access the main gate, but you cannot access some of the floors. But there are other buildings where you can access the building as well as whatever floors you want. So the access to building itself is authentication, and then access to particular floors is authorization. In our E2E testing, we also deal with both authentication and authorization based on whether the application supports it or it's possibly a public facing open web portal where none of this matters. So considering the scenario where both authentication and authorization is there, the E2E approach traditional was we used to do repeated logins. So if you remember any of your old Selenium code base, you would also remember there was a before test or possibly a before class annotation where you would put the code for logging into the test, because one Selenium session would take one test as an isolated session, and then it would kill the browser, and then it will generate a new instance of the browser and start its HTTP interaction with the browser to make sure that you had a fresh instance of the browser for every test. But that also meant that if you were running 200 tests and if the login part was taking, let's say, possibly 600 microseconds, you would eventually accumulate 600 into multiplied by 200 microseconds, which is almost, let's say, a handful of minutes wasted in just doing the login every time you run a new test. So that was a problem. And then there are stateful and stateless tests also. So think about a scenario where you go to an application and then you do some things and come back, and then you go to an application again and do something. But there are scenarios where you go to an application, make some changes like change the settings, which change the state of the application at the server side, and then you log in again. But now the user that logged again, possibly the same user, sees a different set of settings on the application. So that was one of the consideration in traditional, and people used to possibly have multiple users in their properties files. And so what I'm trying to say is all of this mechanism was a mess. So there were problems. So these were the outcomes with these problems. The debugging was very slow and tiresome. The tests were slow. As I said, you would add time for each login. The tests were flaky because if you are doing login through UI, you are making your test prone to possibly an non-deterministic failure in that part also. And then you could not do parallel runs because let's say your application was stateful. Then you would not be able to do parallel runs because one user would see change state and that would fail your test. Okay. Let me also brief you on the difference between stateful and stateless tests. So think so at stateful test is not isolated. As I said, it changes the settings. It's difficult to parallelize, more difficult to debug, and requires a setup. So making the change, if you remember the typical E2E.
Deepak, you're on mute. Maybe you'll have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, we lost your voice, Deepak.
Is it okay now?
Yes.
Okay. So what I was saying was in that I can hear babies.
Yeah, request everybody to be on mute, please.
Okay. So in a stateful test, you cannot parallelize. It's very difficult to debug, and it requires a setup. So setup is, if you remember the E2E, classic E2E arrangement, it is, let's say, arrange and then act, do something, and then assert, find or validate what you were trying to validate, right? So the arrange part is where you do something. And in a stateful test, that doing something part was very tricky because you had to change the state of the application. Okay, so now let's talk about Playwright's authentication strategy. So what Playwright does is it kind of emulates the real user behavior. So a real user who comes to your application and has, let's say, a proper login that you have given them, they would not log in every time they have to perform some action on your application, right? So what Playwright does is it lets you store the storage state of the application locally that you can reuse for every test. And we'll see the demo of this thing. The second thing is you can also do API-based login. And it's not just limited to Playwright as far as this technique goes. You can also do the same in Cypress. So you can do the API-based login in a similar fashion. You go to, you hit the endpoint, you grab the token, you keep the token in your storage state, and then you can run your UI tests without doing login every time. And then you can, let's say if there are stateful tests, then what you have to do is you can use fixtures, because what Playwright does it isolates one parallel worker as one browser context. So you can use fixtures like, let's say, an admin user, a normal user, stuff like that. And those things will work in a separate parallel worker. So they won't interfere with each other. So give me a second. I'll now share my screen, my Visual Studio Code, and
You might have to share the entire screen, maybe that's probably it, right?
is there an option to
Yes, so
desktop?
when you
Can you see
yeah,
my entire screen now?
yes, we can see the desktop.
Okay, good. All right. So can you see the Visual Studio Code?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So these are two tests. If you copy this sourcedemo.com/inventory and paste it in a browser, it will ask you for a login. But as you see, I'm not giving it any login right now. Right. And then I'll tell you what all I did to get in this state. So there is a auth setup. As I said, the classic E2E test arrangement is arrange, act, and assert. So this is the arrangement part. So what I have done is I created an auth setup.ts. I added the username password. To check to store the cookie, what I need to do is because sometimes it may redirect to other pages, right? So you give it some time. You let's say while doing it manually, you see that once the entire page is loaded, there is a particular locator that comes up. You wait for that locator, and then you store the context of the browser in a file called auth file, right? So which for me is user.json, which is here. Okay, so what I have done is the setup will run only once for one test suite. It will take login with your username password, and then it will store the session in a file, and then you can go ahead and write your tests. So these are my tests. The first test is go to this URL, wait for the header, which should be products. And the second test is login and check for this logo. And as you can see, let me just copy this to I'll copy it and paste it in a browser to show you that see, so when I paste this, it asks me for a username and a password. So it's not an open web page, right? So I'll now go to the test tab and run these tests. You see, it did three things. It ran the setup thing, got the session state, stored it in the user.json, and then it passed both the tests. So this is how
Where did it take the username password from? Did
the setup.ts, and it runs only once, like a user would do. So that's what I said. It is a perfect emulation of the user behavior that a user would come to your application and do login and then only once, and then do his stuff on your website and go back.
Very nice, yes.
All right, let me now go back to my slides. All right. Okay. So these are the key takeaways from. So what we did, storing the session from doing a setup thing from the UI, and then storing the session in user.json. We can do the same thing by hitting a URL endpoint, not through UI, and it will run the same, right? Given your application has a login endpoint which you can use to probably get either a capability token or any other token which your site can use. And then the key takeaways.
Deepak, can you show these four things once again, if it's possible, because that would help us all.
Which
Like
photo?
how did you store things out?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
No problem. Okay. We'll go to Explorer. It's a simple Playwright folder. Under this folder, I created a .auth folder, and in .auth, I have auth setup.ts, which imports the test and setup from Playwright tests, very generic. And then I have three constants: auth file, username, and password. Auth file is the path of the user.json, which is right here. And then I have simple username and password, which you might also supply from your CI if you don't want to store them in a plain text here. And then
So these variable names can actually come in from basically the
yeah,
variable that we pass, right? Yeah.
you can either you can use the environment variable of node to pass this at the runtime in your CI, or you can if you're okay with passing it as plain text, that's also fine. So then there is a set authenticate method which goes to home page, logs in, waits for, as I said, there are some application, it's very context dependent. Some applications redirect you to multiple pages, like to your SSO page and to somewhere else before the actual application loads. So you have to wait till that time before storing the storage session in your user.json file. And then once you have done it, you go to your tests and then you write your normal spec. But instead of writing login for every test, or possibly a before test method here, you simply go to any URL that requires login, and it will not require login because you have stored the and then you go to playwright dot let me see, playwright dot config. Yeah. So in the config, you have to mention that setup. Setup means logging and storing the file is your dependency for Chrome. Right now, I'm using Chrome, so I mentioned Chrome. You can copy the whole object and paste it again for Firefox. So it will run the same in Firefox as well.
Okay.
So I am telling Cypress to run setup whenever I run setup before I run my test suite once. And then it will use this storage state. So three things in a nutshell. One, make changes in the Playwright config, tell it to use setup and store storage state in user.json. Second thing is create a setup.ts where you actually log in. The third thing is go on and write as many tests you want, and it will use the stored login from your this code base instead of logging every time.
So what happens, like, for example, let's say that you want to do it again, like maybe that time it will try to log in once, and for the remaining tests, it will not log in.
It will not
How?
log in, yes.
So for the first time, at least if you just log out of your machine or you log out of Playwright, that JSON state that you have stored, right, that would become stale, correct? What is the time duration where it will again try to log in? Is it related to the yeah?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let me also, I think I had added the same in my slide as well. The difference between local storage, session storage, and cookies. So that's also an interesting topic. So cookies is so all three are modes of storing something on your computer to reuse and make your life as a web user easier.
Adi, I think there is a similar question in the chat
Yeah.
box.
So
Which
there is Radha Yadav is asking, is it storing authentication details in browser cookies? I think there's a Go ahead. Yeah.
Give me a second. I'll actually show you what is stored in the so this is the cookie. It's It's similar to the cookie which a real browser or a real application would store on your computer.
Okay.
Right? It's not, because we are not creating it manually. So you log in into a system during the setup method, and it stores this cookie on your system. To reuse it, so assume a scenario, your code is here. You are running this on, let's say, a cloud Selenium provider like Browser Stack or Lambda Test or anywhere. So it will store this cookie on their host. Get my point?
Yes.
So browser actually runs from somewhere, right? From a machine. If the browser is running from, let's say, a Browser Stack's cloud host or from Lambda Test cloud host, it will store this cookie there and then reuse this cookie every time it runs a new test. Because it's persistent. It's not session storage which would get killed if you close the browser. As you saw when I ran the test, it actually opened 3 browser instances as closed 3. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and there's another one that Radha is asking, what is the value under local storage value?
The local storage is a different thing. Local storage is an HTML5 construct where, let's say, I am a person, I go to an application and I want to store my preferred things, like I like the dark mode of of a particular application, right? So local storage is that. It's also persistent, but when you kill the browser, it does not get killed. It will stay there unless you go ahead and possibly kill the local storage itself. You have to flush it out to reset it. And it's not normally cookies is something which we use for logins and maintaining user activity. Not so. Let's say you go to Myntra.com and you look at some of the stuff. Possibly they will also store that search history in your cookies. And then you open Facebook and they will show you those, because cookies in every browser except Firefox, cookies are not stored in separate buckets. They are just open for every site to use. So let's say Facebook would come, read your cookies and give you those ads that you were searching for, let's say Chelsea boots of size 9 on Myntra, and then it will start giving you ads from Ajio.com, stuff like that. So local storage is a separate concept. So give me a second. I'll try to see. I remember I had, yeah. Do you see this slide?
Yeah.
I don't know how I skipped it. So I had also listed the difference between 3 types of web storage that we normally use. So one is local storage. It's an HTML5 construct. Session storage is also HTML5, and cookies is an traditional method. It was present in HTML4 as well. Session storage is volatile. You kill the browser, it's gone, and rest of the 2 things stay. Unless you go ahead and tell your browser to kill the data, kill the cookies, then they go. And JavaScript can access all 3 of these things. And I also listed the purpose and examples. And in the reference, in case you are planning to share these slides with the audience, I have given this Xenon stack example, which has given a very detailed description between these 3 things. So you can also, the audience can look at this and read more about 3 states of storage. I think it's a good thing for a QE, especially end-to-end testers, to know about these things before they start their test automation journey.
Yeah. And there are a couple of more questions if you probably can answer. Yeah. So there is one which Amol Chauhan is asking, how does it work in grid? You already answered for Sauce Lab and Lambda test, right? Does it change there?
It changes there, yes. So as I said, Playwright has isolated every parallel run in a worker node. So by grid, you mean parallel runs, right?
Right.
So what you will do in that is, instead of creating possibly a setup file, you will create a login for each worker in the file itself, and then it will assign one separate worker on the So what happens in grid is it gives you, at least in Playwright, it gives you an index of the test, right? So once you do the setup, it assigns that index at the runtime to the worker, and then they don't interact with each other, provided they are stateless tests.
Right.
They'll be self-isolated. They'll run parallelly. Everything would be fine. There is no issue. And to learn about it more, you can again, as I said, go to Playwright docs. There is a totally awesome documentation of how this storage state is implemented using parallel workers. And that is exactly, I think, you mean by grid.
Right. And can you share those links in the chat while I ask you another question? One is basically, is there a concept? Obviously, you have these stored when you run it. Is there a concept of hard refresh where these actually cookies or the storage setup goes away?
Yes, there is. So that's the good thing about I personally like as a person who was a QE, who had worked on Selenium a lot for maybe 10, 12 years, and then worked as a front-end development manager as well. Some part of me is also a front-end developer. So with that experience, I can safely say that the modern JavaScript frameworks like Playwright and Cypress are way better to do end-to-end testing for modern applications, because JavaScript gives you access to those things that Selenium would not.
Right.
So I'm pasting these links in the chat.
Okay. And when we talk about for applications where they want you to log in every time and you don't have access to, like, for say cookies, or where it is not allowed, is there a way that we can use that? Like, for example, we were doing hackathon and we saw that when we were doing email login, doing it multiple times simultaneously or multiple times, it was basically failing. It was trying to say that it didn't work like that, and it didn't allow people to save it in cookies either. So would it work there, or how would it change?
That from a development perspective, putting governor limits on repeated logins is something that people do, right? It's called rate limiting.
Yes.
So to bypass that, what you can do is you can get a list of, let's say, 30 different logins, and then run those logins as parallel workers. You're not actually logging in. That's the trick. You're not going to a /login screen and then doing the login action.
Right.
You're using a cookie, and wherever a browser opens, cookie can be stored. A browser will not open randomly out of nowhere. There would be some part of a host which has all the resources like CPU, memory, disk, where a browser is running. It can be cloud, it can be local, it can be anything. So if there is a place from where a browser opens, you can safely store a cookie there. And 90% of the websites would not run if you disable the cookies.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Any other questions that I missed? Let me see.
Yeah. Any other questions, guys? So there is a question from Komal Kharat. She says that, is this applicable to browser testing only, or we can do this for desktop?
It is applicable to only browser testing, because we are talking about browser context like storage cookies. You don't have the concept of cookies in desktop, even though you have the concept of storage state in API testing. So it applies to API testing as well as browser testing, not the desktop testing or the system application testing.
True. Good. Any more questions, guys? Anything that you want to ask? Deepak had an emergency today, and that's the reason we are doing it like this. He wanted to move little earlier. So if you have any more questions, we would like you to ask it now. A simple question. I don't know the answer. Does Playwright allow desktop application automation as well, Deepak?
As far as I know, no, it does not.
I know. Yeah. Good. And I think we are basically before time right now because Deepak wanted to leave early, and I think he has explained well. We have asked questions, and this session is recorded as well. We will also share the slide deck with everybody. Deepak, would you be able to share your video? I would like to thank you for your time and
Of
maybe
course,
run a
of course.
quiz in this free time now.
Of
And if
course.
there are more questions, is there a way that people can reach out to you, Deepak?
You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I was also planning to ask one quiz question in the chat. If you allow me, I'll
Please do that. Yeah, please do that. Yeah.
Okay. So whoever answers it first in the chat, they can contact me on LinkedIn to.
Can you share your LinkedIn
Of
URL
course,
as well? Yeah, please do.
I'll paste it in the chat. So I talked about 3 types of web storages: local storage, session storage, and cookies. So in the chat, whoever mentions which of these is volatile can contact me for a swag on LinkedIn.
Yes, make sure that you share your LinkedIn profile and then make sure that can you put that question also? Yeah, there are people who already answered. Look at the one who answered first. Yeah,
Amol
Amol.
Chavan. So this
Yeah.
is my LinkedIn. I'll give you my LinkedIn. Amol deserves fun, good swag.
Amol, congratulations on getting this through. Prachi, you were fast enough. I think if you look at the same time, it is 13:35, but on the chat history, Amol is the winner here.
Well done.
Every seconds matter, I suppose.
Amol, can you show up on the video as well? We would like to take a photo, a screenshot of you and Deepak here. Amol.
That's the point of the workshop as well. Every microsecond matters because we cannot waste those in logging every time we run a test, right?
Right.
So good job.
So yeah, Amol, can you also take a screenshot and post it on LinkedIn, thanking Deepak for this wonderful short session, even though he was in an emergency situation. Are you taking this session from a car by any chance, Deepak?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I know that you are on your way, and we need that selfie. Thank you, Amol. Amol, is that your son who has joined the conference? It would be great to have him also. Can you bring him, or maybe younger brother or whatever he is, right?
He's my son. He's just curious.
Hello.
And on the camera. Say hi.
Very nice. Say hi.
Curious
Good.
people become good QEs when they grow up.
Curiosity is the key. Wisdom and curiosity, both are being unique and important in this journey. So guys, can you take a snapshot here, Amol? And I think Deepak, thank you so much. Even in this emergency, while you're taking this session from your car, we really appreciate this time.
No
and
problem.
many thanks again. I would like to applaud and say thank you so much for taking this time out.
Thanks
and
for
still
having me.
managing to take this session for us. Thank you so much, Deepak.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.